When you watch the mainstream media news, do you feel a little twitch? Is there a tingle in your left hand? Is your jaw locked? We have the solution. Welcome to Reasonable Arguments, the podcast where thoughtful debate meets unfiltered fun. Coming to you from Sarasota, Florida, where your hosts, Jamie Miller and Jennifer Bash, make sense of the chaos. Together, we mix informed conservative commentary, playful banter, and just the right amount of nonsense to keep it entertaining. This is Reasonable Arguments, and now your hosts, husband and wife duo, Jamie and Jennifer.
Hi.
Hey, babe.
All right. So we're just going to jump right in today because we're going to be talking about all of the departments today. Well, maybe just three, but pretty big departments. So let's start off by talking about the Department of Education, or as President Trump would say, the con job that he wants to get rid of. So reading this today, and it's interesting because finding that they are bringing in McMahon from the WWE to basically get rid of this department and work herself right out of a job, because what's she going to do once the department's gone? And then reading more about the Department of Education, because of course I have never researched this before in my life, just finding things that the Department of Education does. And I know that you and I have talked about this before, and you have always felt that the Department of Education was kind of a waste of time and money and stuff like that.
Well, you would know a lot more about the Department of Education if you had read my blog, Reasonable Arguments, on Substack. So thanks for letting the audience know that you zipped right past that one.
I must have missed that one come through by email. I'll have to go back and look. All right. So some of the problems that people are seeing with the Department of Education are that schools are falling behind. Students are not scoring as well as other countries. There's too much federal control, too many rules and not enough results, obviously. And student debt is out of control. They're saying with bringing it back into the states might be a good thing, but what actually happens to the students that are currently relying on the federal education programs that, for disabled people and things like that? So how does, the states are going to have to then take on that responsibility, right?
So there's a couple of things. I recently debated someone who was an advocate for the Department of Education at the University of South Florida. And about 2/3 of the way through the debate, she's like, yeah, well, the education department isn't really about educating or tests or scoring or anything. And I was like, well, thank you for agreeing that we're spending billions of dollars not to educate our children, because the Department of Education has just become a compliance agency. It's become a way for the federal government to enforce its will upon states, and that's it. And so there are programs, a lot like USAID that we've talked about in the past. There are programs that need to probably stay. For instance, Pell Grants, which are grants for underserved high school students who are going to college, existed prior to the Department of Education, and they were managed by the Department of Treasury. So there's no reason why Pell Grants can't go back to the Department of Treasury. What you were speaking about with underserved children, that can go over to Health and Human Services. The one thing that the Department of Education falls under the Department of Education that is clearly the one and only federally constitutional responsibility is education on Indian reservations, and that can go back under the Department of Interior with the Department of Indian Affairs, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So there's nothing that the Department of Education is doing that, number one, has anything to do with education, and number two, any programs that exist that cannot be done, that need to stay with the federal government, that can't be done under a different department.
So is the Department of Education, is it a new program, or is it something that
it was developed in 1979 under Jimmy Carter? It was voted in under 1979, but you have to go back to the 50s and 60s for the impetus for Democrats wanting the Department of Education, and it all came about because of Brown versus the Board of Education, and the federal government wanted another tool in its toolbox to ensure the desegregation of schools. And so, and I don't think anybody's going to argue for, quote, the segregation of schools. But by 1979, the segregation of schools was effectively over. And, and so to the extent that it can be over. And so, so now a compliance agency was created. And what does a compliance agency do? As we see time and time again, the federal government grows and it becomes, more of a compliance agency in more areas of people's lives and more area of trying to make states comply with arbitrary federal rules that may or may not apply to that individual state.
So if I know that many conservatives believe that education should be local, but how would shutting the department down, how do you think that would actually improve schools? Because there would be growing pains if they have to start doing things on their own at this point.
There's not going to be growing pains because nearly all education is governed by the states already. And so there's not really, there's a question of maybe some money going to states that, to fill these programs that may need to stay that are managed by the Department of Education. But nearly all education is governed by local and state governments already. The federal Department of Education has nothing to do with education. So there won't be any growing pains.
So do you think that keeping the department and just having it for, the specific programs that you had mentioned, the Pell Grants and for the students with disabilities and things like that, do you think that it would be beneficial to keep the department?
No, we should not have a cabinet level agency for something that's not mentioned in the Constitution. We just shouldn't. And so, there's no reason to have a federal Department of Education.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to our next subject, which is RFK Jr. being confirmed as health secretary. So he is
sworn in today.
And first, I want to ask about Rachel Levine, because again, that was another thing that I have never really researched. I mean, I've heard different things and stuff like that, but never really researched her specifically. And so she was brought in during the Biden administration. And just a question as far as her being a transgender man, woman, do you think that all of the...
A man who cross-dresses.
A transgender man. And do you think that all of the woke things and transgender, everything like that started because of her? Or was it started prior to her?
This has been a fundamental march towards ridiculousness, starting back with the Obama administration. It certainly went on steroids under the Biden administration. It's, these DEI efforts that are being utilized to transform and to even mutilate our children are, number one, unconstitutional, number two, immoral, and number three, there's no reason for our taxpayer dollars to be spent on it.
Okay, so some see RFK as a problem, just because he doesn't have the background that Rachel Levine did as far as healthcare background. He has obviously been against vaccines and everything like that. He's very much into more holistic approaches of healthcare. And so I guess we have to really decide him being skeptical about vaccines, could his leadership hurt public trust when or if another pandemic were to break out?
Well, there's certainly something going on. I'm not sure that it's vaccines. When in the last 25 years, we've gone from 1 in 1,000 children being diagnosed with autism to now about 1 in 110. And so, whether that is more children should have been diagnosed 25 years ago, that's certainly a possibility. We're called reasonable arguments, so we're willing to look at all possibilities. But, some people suggest that that's vaccines. Even 25 years ago, certainly when Nathan and Curtis were born, there were, a dozen vaccines, not 110 or whatever children are getting these days in their first 5 years. And, so there's some, we can talk about lead, we can talk about plastics. There are a lot of health issues. We can talk about red dye, some of the things that Robert Kennedy is a believer in that is harming the health of Americans. And so And quite frankly, a lot of countries around the world have outlawed some of these things. So, do we need to make sure that the pendulum doesn't go too far too fast? Yes, we need to make sure the pendulum doesn't go too far too fast the other way. But we also need to make sure that we have a logical, reasonable discussion about how these things are happening, why they're more prevalent in America than other parts of the world. And, we should be the healthiest people in the world, and we're not. And so part of that is us, laziness, not enough exercise, too much alcohol, all the things that you want to talk about. But certainly some of these things have to do with antibiotics in food and growth hormones in chickens as they're growing, and, all the things. So we need to look at things and balance, what we need to balance feeding our population with the health of our population, right? And so it's a delicate balance. I hope we don't go too far too fast, but we certainly need to take a good look at all of it.
So he really doesn't have any experience of running a large department or anything like that. And obviously this department is something that, is very heavily scrutinized, especially, after COVID. So what do you think are going to be his biggest hurdles?
Well, let's be honest,
starting there.
Let's be honest. A lot of Democrats are being hypocritical about, Pete Hegseth. They've gone down the list of throwing things against the wall. Oh, they're not qualified. They're not capable. They haven't done this before. There's not a whole lot of people who have run a federal department before. And so, what Donald Trump is saying is like the people who have done it in the past have failed. They failed the American people. The mainstream media has failed the American people by not holding government officials and bureaucrats' feet to the fire on all this spending. Why are we just finding out about it after, quote, a person who would be qualified to run a department, Elon Musk, who's a CEO of thousands and thousands of employees and billions of dollars? He's the one person, and they're critical of him too. So they're just criticizing anyone for anything. And quite frankly, it's falling on deaf ears because the American public's sick of it.
Well, I mean, just as an American for yourself, I mean, do you have concerns with him being a little more strong-minded, not against medicine and against big pharma and stuff like that? I mean, do you think that he's going to cause waves and maybe create some issues?
In Florida, for instance, we have what we passed a law called the right to try. So, for instance, we have a large senior population, which, so we have a lot of healthy seniors, but we also have, every ailment people can have. And so if people are dying of those ailments, we no longer have to go through FDA approval in Florida. If you're dying of a disease and there's something that's out there that maybe can help you, you now have the right to try. The question is who pays for it? How much does it cost, and does insurance cover it? And the answer is probably not, because it hasn't gone through FDA approval. But, and it's the same thing with holistic medicine. You have the right to try. You should have the right to go down a holistic path as long as hey, if you take the pharmaceutical, you have a 98% recovery rate. If you go down the holistic path, maybe it's 50%. But you might live healthier for the days you have left. And people have the right to choose that. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think that it's, because every medicine you take, it has some sort of impact on your body if you're taking it for a positive impact, but there's always another force out there that's possibly negative that's impacting you. And so people have the right to say, it's their body. They have the right to say, hey, I'd like to try this course of treatment, as long as they know their options. And I think part of it is the financial part of it. Mm-hmm. If I go down this 98% likelihood to live, but I'm going to bankrupt my family, do I want to put my family through that? Or do I have a 50% shot over here, but I definitely don't bankrupt my family? Maybe I take the 50-50 shot, and if I end up on the wrong 50%, done what I can for my family, and I'm willing to live and die with that.
So does this department have the authority to make big pharma, lower their prices and stuff like that? Do they have that authority? Or
well,
who
we have
has
to be.
that authority?
Here's the thing: you have to be careful about trying to dictate prices for anything, right? Because if it wasn't for big pharma, we wouldn't have people living to 90, 95 years old healthy. You know, the number of, or let's put it this way, the number of people who would be living to that age healthy would be the same percentage of people who were living to that age healthy in 1950. Right. And so, you know, and I think we all agree that the number and percentage of people living longer, healthier is much greater. And certainly when we look around the world looks to US big pharma for solutions to medical problems throughout the world. And if it wasn't for the innovation of big pharma, we would not have people living. Cancer would still be the C word. Right? Like, oh, you got cancer? Good luck. We're going to try to cut that out of you. And if you live through the surgery, you know, and you live another 2 years, we might have gotten it all. But now with all the effectiveness of strategies to handle cancer that you can go through, and even for, you know, what they used to, you know, like breast cancer, they used to be, okay, here are your 3 options. Now there's 18 different types of cancer, or however many there are, and there's 30 options for each one. You know, so you have to really educate yourself on what it is you want to do, and what your tolerance level is, what your risk level is, and what type of cancer do you have, and, you know, what's your likelihood. You know, the not testicular cancer, but prostate cancer, you know, is one that's normally slow growing. So some people that are 80, 85 when they're diagnosed with prostate, they're like, I'm not going to do anything. It's a slow growing cancer. I'm still likely to die of something else, so I'm just going to live with it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's their right. I'm going to live and die with it. And, you know, if it's what takes me out at 95, then okay, I still had another 10 years. You know, so I don't think you're not going to see the dismantling of big pharma. I don't think you're going to see price controls necessarily on big pharma. I think you're going to see some negotiations on how quickly, you know, how can big pharma balance the billions of dollars they do in research that they have to recoup when they sell a drug, right? So, you know, and they have this small window before drugs go generic, and they have to make their money in that small window. So, and it's whatever it is, 7 years, I think, is my recollection. And so, and then after 7 years, it's kind of on the open market and you can get it generic. And so those are all, I mean, maybe they change it to 5, you know, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think you're going to just point blank say all drugs are $10 a month, because you're not going to have big pharma developing new drugs that are providing the high quality of life later in life like we do.
Right. So do you think that he can balance his personal views with what he feels are already out there?
You know, I think he's a Kennedy, right? And Kennedys are about legacy. He was raised with legacy, and I think he would want to continue some level of legacy. Certainly not going to be dismantling the health system in America to destroy people's health. I think he wanted this job for the right reasons. And yes, he has some ideas that may or may not be mainstream. And, you know, I think that voice will be heard within the department. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to, I think it'll work its way out.
Okay.
Or balance.
Right. Yeah, let's hope, right? Okay, so let's move on to Kash Patel, which he is on to, I guess, the second round, if I understand this whole process correctly.
I think he's coming in for a vote here tomorrow or Saturday by the full Senate, maybe? Or does he have one more committee? I know he had a committee today.
It's now the Senate must decide.
Right. So I think it's to the full Senate.
Yeah. So he will be becoming, I hope, the FBI director.
Mm-hmm.
Now he is another one that, he really doesn't have too much experience, I guess, as far as that. He is kind of like me and loves his conspiracy theories, and I guess he's very vocal about that. So I guess on the Democrat side, they're worried that he will be too political and not run the department fairly. But the Republican side is very, I guess, sure that he will fix corruption and restore the trust in the FBI. Because I guess there's been, some trust as far as the Russian involvement and everything like that. So, question is, he's very loyal to Trump, obviously, and could that damage the FBI's reputation or make it harder for the Bureau to do its job?
So the FBI has no reputation left after Joe Biden, and that's unfortunate because there's a lot of good career FBI nerds who do stellar work and have nothing political in their background and don't make political decisions. And, that's been unfortunate that they've been manipulated into these political prosecutions and political investigations. And, I think the people in November of 2024 voted for the FBI to stop that activity. They did not vote for Democrats to stop that activity and Republicans to start it. And, I hope that line is not blurred, but when you look at it is 360 degrees of viewing an elephant in the fact that if you believe that Nancy Pelosi illegally impeached a president of the United States trying to commit a coup within Congress to remove a president of the United States, which quite frankly, I believe, and I think Kash Patel believes, that should be investigated because she had information that wasn't found out for a decade later or nearly 5 or 8 years later that they knew that Donald Trump wasn't involved with Russia and all the things they accused him of, which they based an impeachment of the president of the United States upon. And that is inexcusable and it should be investigated. And so while I hope that we don't have, quote, retributions from the FBI, there are things that Democrats have done during the last 8 years, both to Trump and under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration, that are fair game for investigations.
So we talked on another podcast about how the FBI is not all of them, but some of the people are kind of running scared. Is this something that you think Patel will come in and eliminate right away, try to weed out, see what's going on? How do you think he's going to approach this on day one?
If FBI agents were using their government positions for political purposes, they should run scared. They broke the law by doing so, and they broke their code of conduct by doing so, and they should be fired. Now, there's a fine line. If somebody was out investigating someone because their superiors said so, and they went and had the investigation in good faith, and hey, I'm just a foot soldier doing my job, I think there's a fine line between somebody, developing political activity and not. Like, if you're an FBI agent and you were sifting through Melania Trump's underwear, you should be fired.
Did that really happen?
Yes. And if you were an FBI agent who went to Donald Trump's printer in Mar-a-Lago and printed out the word confidential to lay things out on the floor and put pieces of paper on them that said confidential when those documents did not say the word confidential on them, just to influence a press picture, a picture that you were going to leak to the press that should have been classified, number one.
How do they know that people did that?
That's what they did.
But how was that?
It's been either admitted or they found it out. But so they printed the word classified, and there's a famous picture of all this stuff down on Donald Trump's floor with these papers on them that say classified. Those documents didn't have the word classified on them until the FBI agents printed the word classified and put them on for the picture. So if you were creating photo ops for political purposes, you should be fired.
Yeah.
And if you were directed to do so and you didn't cause enough of a stink that you weren't fired then, or that you quit because you had too much integrity to conduct that type of activity, you should be fired. And so, at some point, if you're going to be in the FBI, that should be the law enforcement that has the most integrity in the United States. And so if you conducted these political activities or did things that you knew were wrong, and just did so because, quote, I was told. Like, again, it's a very fine line between somebody just going off and doing their job and then conducting these political activities. But if you knew they were wrong, you should have either made enough of a stink that it either didn't happen, you were fired, or you should have quit. Like, your integrity should have, as an FBI agent, should have required that of you. And if you don't meet those requirements, you don't belong in the FBI.
So again, back to my question, because I don't know if you answered it fully, but if they know who these people are, do you think that they will be terminated?
I think once they find out who they are, if they do find out who they are, they will be terminated, and they should be.
So what do you think that Patel could do to make, I don't want to say the Republican people trust more, but all in all, what do you think that he could do to build that back up?
Listen, it's a long, hard road. I think the number one thing is transparency. And that's a difficult spot for somebody in law enforcement, right? The FBI has long had a philosophy, I think a correct one, of, quote, not commenting on active investigations. Right. And that's smart. I don't think anybody's going to say that the FBI should be out in, but that's part of the problem is the FBI was leaking information this whole time against Donald Trump. And that's where the lack of credibility comes in today, where people do not trust the FBI. And, so I think...
who does the FBI actually report into? Like, is it a department?
The president,
they write into the president?
Yeah, I think so. The FBI director reports to the president, I believe.
Okay.
It's probably the attorney general. Excuse me. Now that I think about it.
Okay. And how do you think that Patel could come in and show that he will run the FBI fairly and not let politics get in the way? Like, he can't, I'm assuming he can't come in and start guns blazing and, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take you out. I'm going to find out who's guilty. He probably has to come in and...
Well, I think he has to be transparent in his actions, which is probably set up some level of committee that then, unless they've already identified some of these folks, which they may have. And if they've already identified them, you bring them in, let them say their piece, and cut them loose and send them on their way. And, and so I think it probably is a very quick, operation. I don't think it, to the extent that they have some level of investigation, I don't expect it to be a long one. My guess is they know exactly who was at the root of all these things. And, for the most part, I think frontline employees will, I don't want to say have a pass, but they'll be put on notice that this activity is no longer tolerated.
It's just crazy because after we watched the O.J. Simpson thing and seeing how backhanded, and whether it's true or not in that case, I don't know, but just how backhanded that this can really be to, implicate someone for maybe something they didn't do. Now,
for the record,
totally
I told you while we
guilty.
were watching it, I was like, for the record, I believe O.J. Simpson did it, but I also think that the police got so nervous about making the case that they planted evidence to secure a win, and they got caught.
I don't know if I believe that. I don't
blood
know.
on the back gate, showing up 6 days after the fact, that's a problem.
Where did they get the blood from?
That
someone was just carrying
around
blood
from him. They took blood from him.
Oh, that guy's so guilty.
I don't doubt that he did it. No, here's the thing. He's not guilty. He may not be innocent, but he's not guilty because
the civil suit.
Because a jury said he's not guilty.
Yeah, but the civil suit definitely came back and said that he had
was not innocent.
Whatever. Yeah, I don't like that guy. Okay, so I guess we just have to keep an eye on what's going to happen. I don't know if you saw, but Triple H was behind Linda McMahon today when she was in her hearing or whatever you want to call it.
That's fantastic.
That's pretty cool, right? So we'll have to see what happens with Patel and Linda. I guess Linda still has to be nominated in as the Secretary of Education. And do they even care? Or confirmed? Do they even care at that point? I mean, if they know that Trump is getting rid of it, I mean,
well, there's one thing to say getting rid of it, right? But it literally takes an act of Congress to create the Department of Education. It takes an act of Congress to get rid of it in all likelihood, unless there's some legal maneuvering that I'm unaware.
And how long do you think that would normally take?
It's taken 40 years or so
Oh.
already. So are we going to get rid of the Department of Education in the next 18 months? Probably not, because you don't have the 60 votes to close debate on it. And so in the US Senate. And so, are you going to have a USAID situation where you just go in and you gut everything and you start moving the programs that would normally be under the Department of Education to these other departments, so that you have, I worked one time with a project for Altria, which was the Philip Morris company, and they had just expanded their PR team from 2 to 5 people. And there's this national, multi-billion-dollar company, and they had 2 PR people. And I went up to the 2 PR people, and they were old guys, and they brought in a younger team. And I was like, how did you get away with being the only 2 people for 20 years? They're like, well, somebody needed to work when the other one was on vacation. And I'm like, well, how did you run an entire PR department for this multinational, multi-billion-dollar company? And they said, well, how many people do you need to say no comment?
Oh my God.
True story. And then, so how many people do you need to run the Department of Education when there's nothing for the Department of Education to do? I think you probably need a Secretary of Education, a driver, and maybe a scheduler, and you can get away with 3 people and clear out the rest of the building.
Oh my God. This drives me crazy. Okay, so
I'm driving you crazy, or the thought drives you crazy?
Just the thought. I don't know. Okay, so let's move on to the social media portion, which I love. I love pulling different things from social media. So the first one I pulled was a meme that shows a man and a woman, and the man is asking the woman, "What do you want for Valentine's?" And the woman's reply is, "I want men to stop making decisions about my body." So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know that I've ever made a decision about somebody's body. So
I'm assuming this is coming down to the losing human rights and all of that.
It's I guess she's saying, I want to have the right to have abortions and all those things. And, the problem is, and we've talked about this in the past, that Roe versus Wade didn't give women rights. It restricted state rights. And so a lot of women over generations were lied to, that they somehow had these rights that were not given to them. They were restricted rights of states. And so, when the Dodd decision came down, it gave those states their rights back. And so I haven't seen the meme, but,
Yeah, people just, you see these posts still coming out, and I want to believe that it's just the part of not understanding everything completely that makes people still post this kind of stuff now.
Well, Democrats were convinced that this was going to be the election issue that tipped the election in Kamala Harris's favor. And so there's still a group of people, mostly white, college-educated women, who believe that this will be the issue for the next election. For instance, I was at the University of Florida's campaign seminar, post-election seminar, where political consultants, people come together to speak and discuss, a group of master's level students who are studying political campaigning. And one of the employees for the Florida Democratic Party gave a whole presentation on women's rights and how it was the issue for the next 25 years. And I was like, okay, well, it wasn't even the issue last year. And so, and it's just, I was sitting with someone and we kind of leaned over to each other, and it was just somebody who's a data expert. I was like, this wasn't even an issue really last year. I feel like you're missing the boat. And especially when there's so many other problems in the world and in the country, and we're finding all this fraud, or Elon Musk is finding all this fraud within our government that was perpetuated over decades by both parties, that that we have to review and take care of. I just think that this issue falls to the back burner. I mean, certainly within the Democratic Party, the trans issue is a much bigger issue if you're running a Democratic primary than the abortion issue, which is just shows you how far the Democratic Party has run off the reservation from the average American. But I think polling would show you that's the case. I think it's just people yelling into a canyon, so to speak, and believing the echo is the adoration of their fans.
Okay. All right. So the next one is, this was posted by, I don't think this, not even verified, doesn't even have a verified check.
Oh gosh, how would we even use it? They don't even have the blue check.
No, but it says Elon Musk spent $290 million to buy our government to shadow the president, and spending $4 million buying his own trucks, which is a $110 million profit. And I guess that was posted by, it says the State Department plans $400 million order for armored trucks from Musk's Tesla. Now, I don't know if this is true. I haven't fact checked it yet, but this was a post that I saw on Facebook today.
Jennifer, you're the researcher. You're supposed to fact check. I didn't
have a chance.
I haven't seen this either. And, the truth of the matter is that Elon Musk is volunteering a lot of his time, effort, and talent to ensure our government can continue to exist because, we're spending more than $6.5 trillion a year, more than $2 trillion per year in deficit spending. And, somebody put on our Reasonable Arguments Facebook page, something like, well, how's that money being rebated? All this money that Elon Musk is finding, where's it being rebated to? And I'm like, it's not being rebated. It's money that we're not putting on the credit card. Just because you have a credit limit on your credit card, Jennifer, don't make fun of me here. But just because you have credit limit on your credit card doesn't mean that it's real money to spend. And so
it's not?
Yeah, no, baby.
Jamie on the podcast is different than the Jamie in real life.
Well, that's
did you call it free money?
That's a short time borrowing. It's a short time borrowing, unlike the federal government, which is
I need
forever
to mark
borrowing.
This clip too.
It's just a forever borrowing.
Yeah.
And so, but the truth of the matter is that if we haven't saved $2 trillion yet, there's no money to rebate anywhere. And if we save 2.1 trillion, the extra 100 billion should go to paying off the debt, not towards any other programs or anything else. At some point we have to live within our means and pay down our debt. And it's taken a long time to get here, just like a lot of families that are in debt. If you want to, it's like, I want to take a 4-week vacation to Europe. Great. But I'm going to take the next 10 years to pay it off. So where are you going to go for vacation the next 10 years? Well, instead of doing that, maybe we go camping this year and we don't go in debt. And that's where the United States is, because we're going $2 trillion a year in debt. 1 trillion of that is just to manage the debt. That's just the credit card. That's just the interest. So, and then we're spending an extra trillion still on top of that. And so, we have to rein in at least 2 trillion a year. And we're not even, I don't think Elon Musk is even close to that yet.
No, I did look it up and it is fake news. So no, they have been, that has been denied that they are not buying those trucks, at least not yet. So,
well, and here's the funny part is no emergency services, unless you're in a city and you're giving out parking tickets, are going to use electric vehicles for anything. Because when you need the power, you need gas. And so no sheriff's department, no military vehicles, there's no emergency charging stations anywhere in the world. There's charging stations, but there's no emergency charging stations. So I don't want my ambulance being run by electric vehicle. I don't want them to have to stop and charge to get me to the hospital. They're going to run on gas. Fire trucks, gas. Police cars, gas. Military vehicles, gas. So, anything else is just BS.
All right. So let's get to our final story, which is a Florida woman story. So this one is out of Gainesville.
Oh, boy.
So 2 days ago, what's it called? The Achula? What's it called?
Alachua.
Alachua.
Jeez.
I'm not from Florida. I mean, why don't they just
You
put
even
things the way?
confused me.
I mean, okay, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office posted on their Facebook page, do you have information on the whereabouts of Quantaria Richardson? You might know her by one of her other names, aka Elijah Richardson or aka Panky. If so, please contact investigator L. Matta. She has an outstanding warrant since December for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. So Richardson actually replied to the post, and she said, "Shit, I ain't hard to find. Do your job." And I'm going to say that "shid" was spelled SHIDDDD. So the Alachua County Sheriff, Alachua County Sheriff, replied back and said, "Hey, Elijah Richardson, low key, you ate that. Lucky for you, we're used to those who play hard to get. Real talk, be our Valentine, slide into our DMs, and we will pick you up in a custom green and white whip. We have jewelry that will fit your wrist perfectly, and we already reserved the best bed and breakfast in town. See you soon." So as of today, she still has not been found, but I guess we're going to see what happens. See if she keeps posting.
I can't imagine she's still in Achula.
What is it? Alachua. Oh, good Lord.
Girl.
They need to make these towns a little easier.
That one's not even hard. It's not like Lake Panasoffkee.
Ugh. So we will keep people updated on whether or not she gets caught anytime soon. Maybe by Valentine's Day. We'll see how pretty her jewelry is.
Yeah, that is actually pretty funny. What's funnier is like they responded in a funny way instead of catching her and taking a picture of her being arrested and then responding in a funny way. So they responded in a funny way and kind of like, "Hey, we're coming after you. It's time for you to run."
Yeah, exactly.
So she's in Jacksonville somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's all we got for today.
That's
Thanks
all
for
I
stopping.
have. All right.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.